Last April, a 25-year-old sitting on $165 a month was told by the President of the United States in the Oval Office that they were on track to retire rich. The number was $465,000. And to be fair, the math that produces it is correct. Put $165 a month into a retirement account at 25, earn 6% annually, collect a federal matching contribution of $1,000 a year, hold that for 40 years, you land somewhere close to $465,000. The calculation works. So if the math is right, why does the outcome feel wrong? Because there is a significant difference between a number that is mathematically accurate and a number that is actually enough. $465,000 is both of those things at once, defensible on paper and quietly insufficient in practice. Understanding why that gap exists is what this video is about. Because if you are a working adult doing everything right and the finish line still feels further away than the math suggests it should be, the problem is probably not your discipline. It is the assumption that the number was built on. My name is Alex, and I'm going to show you exactly where the $465,000 figure breaks down in real life and what a retirement plan actually needs to look like to hold up over 30 years. Once you understand how the real math works, you will stop trusting headline numbers and start asking the one question that actually matters before you build anything around a projection. And that starts with what Trump actually said and the real math behind it. There is something worth noticing about the way this announcement landed. Not the policy itself, the number. $465,000 delivered with the kind of confidence that signals the conversation is over. Done. Solved. A 25-year-old saves $165 a month and arrives at 65 as, in the president's own words, rich. The room applauded. The headline wrote itself. And somewhere, a 26-year-old warehouse worker in Memphis opened their phone, saw the number, and thought, wait, is that actually going to be enough? That instinct deserves a serious answer. Here is what the White House actually announced: a new executive order establishing Trump IRA, a website where workers without access to an employer-provided retirement plan could research, compare, and enroll in private sector individual retirement accounts. The program is designed to reach the roughly 50 million Americans who currently have no clear, subsidized path to retirement savings at work. Employees of small businesses, part-time workers, independent contractors, and the self-employed. People who have been effectively locked out of the workplace retirement system that most salaried employees take for granted. As part of the enrollment, qualifying workers would gain access to a federal program called the Savers Match. That is a government contribution, real money deposited directly into the retirement account, of up to $1,000 per year for eligible low-income savers. And the specific projection the president cited goes like this. A 25-year-old saves $165 a month. They qualify for the full $1,000 annual federal match. Their account earns a 6% average annual return. They hold all of that, without interruption, for 40 years. The result is approximately $465,000 at age 65. Nearly $155,000 of that total comes directly from the federal match and its compounding growth. The remaining $310,000 comes from the worker's own contributions plus 40 years of returns. Run that calculation yourself, and you will get close to the same number. The math is not the problem. The problem is the word assuming. Think about what the projection is actually asking for. First, it assumes $165 leaves the account every single month for 4 consecutive decades. Not most months, every month. Through layoffs, medical bills, a transmission that needs replacing, a move to a new city, a period of reduced hours. $165 every month, uninterrupted, from age 25 to age 65. Second, it assumes a 6% average annual return sustained across 40 years of investing. That is a reasonably long-term historical estimate for a diversified stock portfolio. But it is an average, not a guarantee. The sequence of those returns matters enormously, and a prolonged downturn early in the accumulation phase can do lasting damage to a final balance that the average return figure quietly obscures. Third, and this is the one that changes the math most dramatically, it assumes the full $1,000 federal match arrives every year for 40 years. Not some years, every year. That assumption alone is responsible for $155,000 of the $465,000 total. Remove it or reduce it, and the headline number doesn't just shrink, it shrinks significantly. Now consider someone like Thomas, a 27-year-old delivery driver in Atlanta earning $24,000 a year. No employer retirement plan. He is exactly the person this program was built for. $165 a month is tight. It represents about 8% of his take-home pay. But he is disciplined, and he commits to it. On paper, Thomas is the projection. He is the 25-year-old in the announcement 2 years later, doing exactly what was asked. What the announcement did not tell Thomas is that his eligibility for the federal match depends entirely on where his income sits, relative to a specific threshold. And that threshold is the part of this story that the applause in the room drowned out entirely. Because the number is defensible, the story built around it is not. And the first place that story starts to come apart is not in the market. It is in the eligibility rules that determine who actually qualifies for the match in the first place. The fine print on a government benefit is rarely where people look first, and that's understandable. When a program is announced from the Oval Office with a specific number attached, $465,000, it feels settled. The details feel like paperwork. But in this case, the details are the story. The eligibility rules built into the Savers Match don't just limit who can participate. They quietly determine whether the headline number is even in the same conversation as your actual situation. Here's how the qualification actually works. To receive the full $1,000 federal match, a single filer's modified adjusted gross income, that is, your total taxable income after certain deductions, must stay below $2,500 per year. The match doesn't cut off sharply at that number. It phases out gradually as income rises, which is a genuine improvement over the older program it replaces. But the phase-out completes entirely at $35,500 for single filers. Above that, the match is zero. For married couples filing jointly, the phase-out begins at $41,000 and disappears at $71,000, $2,500. That is the threshold for the full benefit as a single filer. To put that in context, a full-time worker earning the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour brings home roughly $15,000 a year. A worker earning $15 an hour, closer to the effective minimum in many states currently, earns around $31,000. That person is already inside the phase-out range. They qualify for a reduced match, not the full $1,000. And the projection was built around the full $1,000 every year for 40 years. This is where the math starts bending away from the announcement. The White House projection doesn't just assume a worker starts below the threshold. It assumes they stay there for 4 consecutive decades. Every year from age 25 to 65, income must remain low enough to maintain eligibility. Think about what that means for Thomas, the delivery driver from Atlanta introduced in the last section. He qualifies today at $24,000 a year. 3 years from now, his company will offer him a dispatcher role at $40,000. He takes it because of course he takes it. His income improved. His family's situation improved. And quietly, with no announcement and no applause, the federal match that was supposed to build $155,000 of his retirement stops arriving. He didn't do anything wrong. He got a better job. The program just wasn't designed to follow him there. And this is the tension at the center of means-tested benefits that rarely gets named directly. The Savers Match is most valuable to the people who need it most. But it rewards them most generously only as long as their financial situation stays difficult. The moment things improve, the moment the program is working, eligibility narrows. That is not a criticism of the intent behind the policy. It is simply how income-based programs function. But it is worth understanding clearly, because the announcement presented none of it. There is also the timing problem. The Savers Match doesn't begin until next year. Anyone acting on this announcement today is still operating under the existing Savers credit, a related but meaningfully different program that delivers its benefit as a non-refundable tax credit rather than a direct deposit into a retirement account. A non-refundable credit can only offset taxes owed. For a worker earning $20,000 a year, who may owe little to no federal income tax, a non-refundable credit is often worth nothing in practice. The Savers Match fixes this by depositing money directly. But that fix doesn't arrive until next year, and the infrastructure to access it, TrumpIRA.gov, isn't operational yet. Then there is the awareness problem. Surveys run consistently over the past decade on the saver's credit. The direct predecessor to this program, with the same target population, found the same result every time. Fewer than half of eligible workers knew it existed. Less than half. A program built for the people most likely to be unaware of it, historically reaching fewer than half of them. The Savers Match has better mechanics. It does not automatically have better reach. So what you have is a benefit that requires income to stay low for decades, pays out less the moment earnings improve, hasn't launched yet, and has a predecessor that most of its intended recipients never successfully claimed. The program is real. The improvement over what came before it is real. But the gap between the announced projection and the likely outcome for a real worker with a real career is also real. The question isn't just who qualifies, it's what they're qualifying for. Because even a worker who clears every eligibility hurdle, earns the full match every single year, and holds a 6% return for 4 straight decades, still arrives at a number that deserves a hard look. Assume everything works. Thomas qualifies every year. The match arrives in full. The market delivers 6% annually without a significant interruption. 40 years pass, and the account hits $465,000 exactly as projected. Clean execution, perfect conditions. The announced outcome was realized in full. Now ask the question nobody asked in the Oval Office. What does $465,000 actually do for a 65-year-old in 2065? Not what does it look like on a statement. What does it produce? What does it pay? What does it cover? Because a retirement account is not a trophy. It is an income machine. And the only number that matters is not what sits in the account on the day you stop working. It is what the account generates every month for the next 25 to 30 years without running dry. Start with the withdrawal math. The figure most financial planners currently use as a sustainable annual withdrawal rate is around 3.7%. That is the rate at which a diversified portfolio has a reasonable probability of lasting 30 years without depleting. Some planners use 4%. The difference between them is not dramatic, so use whichever feels more conservative, and the conclusion stays the same. 3.7% of $465,000 is $17,250 per year. Divide that by 12, and the monthly figure is $1,437. $1,437 a month from a retirement account that took 40 years of disciplined contributions to build. Now add Social Security. For a worker who spent the majority of their career earning between $20,000 and $35,000 annually, the estimated Social Security benefit currently runs somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000 per year, depending on the exact earnings history and the age at which benefits are claimed. Call it $13,000 to keep the math clean. That adds roughly $1,080 a month. Total monthly retirement income, approximately $2,500. Before taxes on the traditional IRA withdrawals, which reduce that figure further depending on the bracket, the average American household currently spends around $4,700 a month. Even for a single retiree living carefully, no mortgage, no dependents, modest lifestyle. Current estimates place basic living expenses at somewhere between $2,800 and $3,500 a month, depending on location. Healthcare alone, which will be covered in detail in the next section, adds pressure that most pre-retirement budgets significantly underestimate. $2,500 a month is not rich. It is not comfortable. In most American cities right now, it is careful. It is watching the account balance every quarter and hoping the roof holds. And that is before inflation does its work on the number. Here is the part that almost never makes it into the announcement. $465,000 is a nominal figure. It is the raw dollar amount sitting in the account in 2065. But a dollar in 2065 is not a dollar today. And the gap between those two things is not small. The average annual inflation rate in the United States over the past 30 years has run around 2.6%. Apply a conservative estimate of 2.5% annually over the next 40 years, and the purchasing power of 465,000 future dollars translates to approximately $170,000 in today's money. $170,000. That is what the headline number actually buys in real terms, not 465,000. 170,000 in today's purchasing power, stretched across a 30-year retirement. To put that in perspective, Americans currently believe they need around $1.46 million to retire comfortably. That figure has risen sharply in recent years as inflation, healthcare costs, and longer lifespans have pushed the realistic retirement target higher. $465,000 is roughly 32% of that number. It is not a destination. It is a foundation, and a modest one at that. None of this means the program is without value. It means the program was presented as an ending, when it is, at best, a beginning. And the gap between those two things widens considerably once you account for the costs that never appear in a projection, but arrive reliably in a real retirement. That is what the projections model, the ideal path, leaves out. And it always bends. Every retirement projection starts from the same place. It assumes the path is straight, contributions arrive on schedule, returns compound cleanly, nothing interrupts. And at the end of 40 years, the number appears, exactly as calculated, exactly as announced. The spreadsheet is internally consistent. The problem is that a spreadsheet has never paid a medical bill, absorbed a rent increase, or watched a portfolio drop 30% in the first year of retirement. The projections model the ideal path. They don't model what happens when the path bends. And in a real retirement, something always bends. Start with the cost that bends it most reliably: healthcare. A 65-year-old retiring today can expect to spend somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000 on healthcare over the course of retirement, and that figure assumes Medicare coverage throughout. It includes premiums, co-payments, prescription costs, dental, vision, and the out-of-pocket expenses that Medicare does not cover. It does not include long-term care. That is its own category entirely. Roughly 70% of Americans who reach 65 will need some form of long-term care before they die. The average duration is around 2.5 years. A private room in a nursing facility currently runs just over $100,000 per year. Assisted living averages around $64,000. Medicare covers almost none of it. Medicaid covers it only after a person has spent down nearly all of their assets, which means the safety net exists, but accessing it requires arriving at it with almost nothing left. 2.5 years of nursing care at $100,000 a year is $250,000. That is more than half of the entire $465,000 nest egg, consumed not by a mistake, not by a bad investment, but by one completely ordinary event that happens to the majority of people who live long enough to retire. This is the number that was absent from the Oval Office announcement, not because it was hidden, it is publicly available data, but because it does not fit inside a projection built around an ideal path. Now, consider what happens to a modest portfolio when the market moves against it early in retirement. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it is one of the most underappreciated threats to a fixed retirement account. The concept is straightforward. A 6% average annual return sounds stable, but averages obscure timing. If the market drops 30% in the first 2 years of retirement, which has happened more than once in the past quarter century, and the retiree is simultaneously withdrawing from the portfolio to cover living expenses, the damage is compounding in the wrong direction. Shares are being sold at depressed prices to fund monthly expenses. Those shares are gone. When the market recovers, there are fewer shares left to recover with. A portfolio this size, hit with a significant early drawdown, can be functionally compromised, even if the 10-year average return looks perfectly reasonable on paper. The sequence matters as much as the average. No projection accounts for that. It just shows you the average and lets you assume the path was straight. Then there is the income ceiling working in reverse. Consider someone like Patricia, a 34-year-old dental hygienist in Denver, who qualified for the full Savers match for the first 8 years of her career at $22,000 a year. Then her practice gave her a senior role. Her salary moved to $43,000. The match stopped. She kept contributing the same amount every month, same discipline, same consistency. But the $155,000 the federal match was supposed to build into her account over 40 years will only partially materialize. Her final balance won't be $465,000. It will be closer to $290,000 for the same effort, the same contributions, and the same 40 years. A raise cost her $175,000 in projected retirement savings. Nobody told her that at the signing ceremony. Finally, there is the reality that sits underneath all of this. A recent Federal Reserve study found that 33% of American households currently cannot cover a sudden expense of less than $500 using cash. For many of the workers this program was designed for, $165 a month is not a savings decision. It is a competition against rent, against utilities, against a medical copay that arrived the same week contributions were due. The projection assumes the $165 is available every month. For a significant share of the target population, that assumption fails before the account is even open. So the program is real. The match is real. The intent appears genuine. But the announced outcome was built on conditions that a real working life routinely fails to preserve. And that raises the most important question this video can answer. Not what the projection says, but what the actual retirement plan needs to look like to hold up against everything the projection quietly ignored. Here's the part most financial commentary skips. It spends considerable time explaining what is wrong with the official number, and then stops, as if identifying the problem is the same as solving it. It is not. So rather than ending on a critique, this section is going to do something more useful. It is going to show what the actual plan looks like for a 25-year-old today. Not the projection, not the press release, but the specific decisions that give a real retirement, a real chance of holding up against a bad market year, a medical bill, a career that improves, and a 30-year window of expenses that no spreadsheet fully anticipates. Start with the target, not the habit, the number. Americans currently believe they need around $1.46 million to retire comfortably. Financial planners broadly fall in the same range. At a 3.7% annual withdrawal rate, $1.5 million produces roughly $55,500 per year from the portfolio alone. Add a Social Security benefit, and the monthly income picture becomes workable in most American cities. That is the realistic target, not $465,000, $1.5 million. Write that number down somewhere and work backward from it, because every decision after this one should be measured against that destination, not the one that was announced in April. Now, here is what reaching it actually requires. At a 6% average annual return, the same rate the White House projection used, accumulating $1.5 million by age 65 requires contributing roughly $650 per month starting at 25, not $165, $650. For a worker earning $28,000 a year, that figure represents about 28% of gross income. That is not a realistic starting point for most people in the income range this program targets. But here is the thing. It does not have to be the starting point. It has to be the destination. And the math of compounding makes that distinction matter enormously. A dollar invested at 25 has 40 years to grow at 6%. That dollar becomes $10.29 by 65. The same dollar invested at 45 has 20 years. It becomes $3.21. The early dollars do not just help more, they do roughly 3 times more work, which means the strategy is not to hit $650 immediately. It is to start at whatever is genuinely possible, then escalate every single time income rises. Here's what that looks like in practice. Take someone like Kevin, a 26-year-old hospital records coordinator in Cincinnati, earning $30,000 a year. He starts contributing $165 a month, exactly the figure from the projection. His income sits below the Savers Match threshold, so he qualifies for a partial federal match of around $700 annually, deposited directly into his account starting next year. At 29, he moves into a billing supervisor role at $44,000 a year. The match disappears at that income level, but he raises his contribution to $320 a month because his expenses did not grow as fast as his salary, and he committed in advance to directing the difference into the account before it became a lifestyle. At 36, he takes a department manager position at $62,000. He opens a Roth IRA, that is, an individual retirement account where contributions go in after tax, growth is tax-free, and qualified withdrawals in retirement are also tax-free, and begins maxing it out alongside his workplace contributions. By 42, his total monthly retirement contribution is just over $600 across both accounts. Run that forward at a 6% average annual return, and Kevin arrives at 65 with approximately $1.32 million, not $1.5 million. but close enough that Social Security, estimated at around $16,000 annually based on his earnings history, covers the gap and then some. He lands in a workable position, not a perfect one, a real one. Two things produced that outcome. Not sacrifice and discipline alone. Those are necessary but not sufficient. What actually drove the result was escalation and structure. Every time Kevin's income grew, his contributions grew with it, and his money sat in accounts built to work in his favor, tax advantaged, diversified, and untouched during down years. That last part carries more weight than most people assign it. The single most destructive thing a retirement account can experience is not a bad market. It is an early withdrawal. Pulling $30,000 out at 41 to cover a short-term gap does not just reduce the balance by $30,000. It removes the compounding that $30,000 would have generated across the next 24 years of growth. At 6% annually, that $30,000 would have become approximately $115,000 by 65. The true cost of the withdrawal is not $30,000. It is $85,000 of future retirement income, quietly erased by one decision that felt necessary in the moment, which brings the whole conversation back to where it started. The math in the announcement is correct. The program is real. But when you measure the announced number against what retirement actually costs, what it produces per month, in today's dollars, after inflation, with healthcare included, the conclusion is not what was said in the Oval Office. And that is worth naming directly. Here is what this video was actually about. Not the program, not the politics. The gap between a number that is technically correct and an outcome that quietly falls short. $465,000 is a real projection built on assumptions that a real career, a real body, and a real economy will not leave undisturbed for 40 years. The math was never the problem. The story was built around it. A few things are worth carrying forward. Nominal numbers mislead. Always convert a future dollar amount into today's purchasing power before trusting it, because $465,000 in 2065 is closer to $170,000 in today's money. Means-tested programs withdraw support the moment income improves. The benefit is real, but it is fragile by design. Sequence matters as much as average. A bad market at 66 does more damage than a bad market at 46, because you are spending shares you cannot recover. And the cost that most reliably consumes a modest retirement account is not a market crash. It is healthcare. The next time a retirement number is presented as a destination, ask what it produces per month in today's dollars after inflation, with healthcare included. If the answer still sounds like enough, believe it. If something here reframes a number you had accepted as settled, share it with someone building a retirement plan around a projection that has not been stress tested yet. And if you want to keep pulling on this thread, subscribe, because the next question is bigger than this one. If the system was designed so that $165 a month is the realistic ceiling for millions of workers, it is worth asking what the system was actually designed to do.